Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
I am Julie Teeling with Life Improvement Radio, and I am here with Martha Southgate with her book, The Taste of Salt, and we're going to talk about how her fiction understanding of addiction and families plays with my first question, actually. What was the reasoning for you to write a fiction book about addiction?
To me, it's a family story about a family that has to deal with addiction, which I think most families with addiction would say. And, I really started just interested in the character, and then I got interested in her history. And then, like a lot of people, I have a history of alcoholism in my family, as many people do. And so I got interested in exploring, what it might do to a family and what it means playing out in the lives of the person who isn't the drug addict, because the protagonist is not the alcoholic in my book.
And I find it interesting on how family members almost mirror some of the addict's behavior without actually having the addiction themselves, like the mother and the father. Well, the father actually had the addiction with the brother. So I think that you did a very good job of portraying that. What do you want the readers to get from it the most?
I think it is mostly about the family, about these people who don't always make good choices, and I include the main character, Josie, in that, and how this addiction, this disease, has affected their behavior, both Josie's and her brother and her father, who are the active alcoholics. Actually, her father gets sober over the course of the book. I'd like people to think about how anything really plays out in your family, and what's more, Josie spends a lot of time pushing her family away, and how you comes to terms with the fact that maybe you can't do that, or the degree to which you can do it.
And I also think it's interesting that she avoids some of maybe those feelings, those uncomfortable feelings, through her work, and then the relationship that she has with the man that she works with when she's married. It's almost like an avoidant thing, or she gets her own high from that. I thought that was an interesting take. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, I didn't plan all this before I wrote it. I think a lot of writers would tell you some of this stuff does come as a surprise to us as we're creating it. But yes, I think some of her behavior mirrors some of the addictions that she grew up with, definitely.
What did you learn with some of your own family history of addiction or dependence?
I'm kind of interested in how it works, and I know there's a lot of science around it now that there wasn't even, like when I started writing it, which was about 3 or 4 years ago. It's advanced since then. So I read some of that, and I read a lot of addiction memoirs. One of my favorite is a book called Drinking, a Love Story by Caroline Knapp. She's someone who got sober ultimately, but she was active alcoholic for 20 years, I think. And she writes really well about what goes on in an alcoholic's mind, which, doesn't always make a lot of sense, but
because you're on a chemical.
Right, exactly. But that really helped me understand some of the brain processes around addiction.
So with that understanding of what you've learned since then, is there anything you would add or change in the book with the information that you have now?
I don't think so. One thing I've heard a little bit more of since I wrote it is people examining a little bit more how relapse works, and that 12-step doesn't really hit it for everybody. My characters, but I don't want to give anything away, but they have mixed experiences with it, and I know it has helped a lot of people, but I'm also have become more aware that it's not the only way by any means.
No, it's not a one-size-fit-all with really any of life's experience. I think people get that kind of thinking that 12-step, if you don't do that, then you can't. There's always other options for you, and you're not alone. I wanted to ask you, too, with your family experience that you had through the process, did any kind of feelings come up for you while you were writing it, or any kind of soul-searching or things that you learned about yourself?
Well, I think in my family, it goes back a generation or two, and seeing how that plays out in my own behavior and in the, I've been fortunate in that it's not a problem I've had, or really in my generation we haven't had. But yeah, it just has forced me to think about how one reacts to this in the midst of, how it plays on a person's development. I have to say, I can't think of anything that I would change exactly, but I guess it helped me understand and be more compassionate to what it feels like.
Yeah, I think I come in contact with a lot of people who just do not understand addiction, so they want to blame the addict, like they're choosing it, or that they're just bad people. And it's very hard to explain to family members sometimes when they're having someone who is addicted, and to kind of bring them back to find that empathy, but not to the point of enabling. The one thing that I wanted to ask you too was, with the character, like, how close to Josie are you?
It's not an autobiographical novel. I mean, I feel like I'd say, I mean, she's not me. I'm close to her in that I really love the water, and I am from Cleveland.
Right.
And, so I do have, and my mother still lives in the house I grew up in, and Josie grew up in a neighborhood similar to mine. And I'm close to her in the way I'm close to the protagonist of all my novels, in that, parts of her are in me and vice versa, and I feel like I understand her. So, because I think really, even if you're writing a person who makes mistakes or is perhaps not even that likable, you have to empathize with them. You don't have to sympathize. You don't have to think, oh, everything they do is great. Right. But you do have to feel for them or feel with them.
Right.
And I was interested in what you said before, that there's still you run into families where they're blaming the alcoholic, because I feel like there is so much information about it out there now that surprises me a little.
I think it's hard because when you're in it, when you're actually in the situation, even with your characters, you could feel that from Josie. It was just like, ugh, get over it.
Right.
Get over it. What are you doing?
Right.
And then even from the mother's perspective, it's hard to forgive when there's so much pain.
Yeah.
So when you're in the thick of it, which I've found in my own experience with people, it's one of the more difficult mental illnesses to recover from. In both sides of it. I have to say, even though we're not on camera right now, that the part that stuck out to me was the shaving of the hair. And I love that. I love that part because it's just such a freeing portrayal that you put out there. But then you did talk about how the disapproval would potentially be there from the family members.
Yeah, well, I would say about the hair, yes. Josie and I have really almost no hair, kind of Sinead O'Connor style. And that, that's another way in which I have to say we're similar. When your hair is this short, you don't have to fool around with it in the water, and I don't like to fool around with my hair. I would say Josie and I share that. And, it was kind of a big step. It wasn't something I ran into actual disapproval with, but it's still, like you said, for a woman in this culture to have very little hair is unusual. Right. So it was a big step.
Right. And I wasn't sure if you had gotten that with your own experience, but you had that was a concern that you had in the book that Josie had kind of said. I always want to do it. I've never been brave enough to do it because I think it's so, I would imagine it's pretty cool and cool.
Easy to deal with.
Well, is there anything before we go that you want to give the readers a message to kind of take home?
Well, I hope that people who read it, even if they don't have substance abuse in their family history, that it gives them a further understanding of what it might be like, and also just makes them think about their relationships with their families, both if there's some sort of tear, how you might repair it, or also just think about family as a thing, because it's something we all have to deal with one way or another. Some of us have to push them away, some of us have to get closer, some of us do have to cut them off and leave them cut off. There are really damaging families, but I think whatever it is, you kind of have to come to terms with it.
And I think that is a really important point, because besides just substance abuse and addiction, family within itself can be so toxic to people. And you're right, just because you're blood related doesn't mean you have to take the punishing behavior that some people who are really just too sick to deal with and take it out on others. So, I think that's an important point. We all have families, relationships, communication issues, and I think it has that relatability to it. So I agree with you. So I want to say thank you. So go get The Taste of Salt from Martha Southgate. You have been listening to Julie Teeling at Life Improvement Radio.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.